All right, ladies and gentlemen, we are here with the Barstool legend, Captain Cons. I've seen a ton of podcasts you've been on where you talk about how your grandfather was in West Point and you also attended West Point. And for myself, I'm a big NBA guy and college basketball guy. And I'm correct me if I'm wrong. I know like Coach K, Greg Popovich went to West Point. Um,
Fish
for
went to Air Force Academy.
Gotcha. Okay. Did Coach K go to West Point?
Coach K went to West Point, played basketball, came back and coached at West Point. That was his first stop on his coaching career.
Amazing. So yeah, like I've seen Coach K went there, astronauts, presidents. What is it about West Point that creates absolute savages like yourself?
Well, number one, I appreciate the introduction and title of legend. That's very kind of you. Savage, also very kind of you. I think it's just the approach that we take to everything where winning is important, whether that's winning on the athletic field, winning on the battlefield. And we take an approach that is unlike any other school in the country between the discipline required to go to school, attending class, wearing a uniform, doing all of the little things correct all the time, every day, and that focus. I think the byproduct is that people take those lessons that they learned at West Point and apply them to whatever path they take in life, whether that's a career in the military, whether that's a career in the military followed by a career in tech. You see a lot of guys on Wall Street that have come from West Point. A lot of folks who have been very successful on Wall Street come from West Point. So I think it's just a byproduct of what the school has always asked of us as we're there day in and day out for that 47-month experience that isn't replicated, not even at the other service academies, okay? Because when you think about when you mix in the military training with all of the academic requirements, with the athletic requirements, no other school replicates that. Not Navy, not Air Force, certainly not Air Force. So I think when you create a unique environment, you will produce a unique individual. And that's a little bit of an oversimplification of it, but that's really the crux of it, in my opinion.
And you talked about attendance. What exactly do they do if you miss a class, or you miss two classes?
I have obviously a lot of friends who went to the regular people school, as I call it. And, even in classes where attendance was kept, they skip classes all the time for one reason or another. But at West Point, if you skip class without an excused absence, because there are reasons that you are allowed to miss class, but if you just miss class because you oversleep or for some reason you decide you don't want to go to that class that day, you get essentially it's a demerit. We call them hours. And so if you miss one class, you get 5 hours. And what that means is on Friday late afternoon and then Saturday and Sunday, instead of doing whatever it is that you had planned to do that weekend, you have to come to a formation in your full dress uniform, get inspected, and then after that 45-minute long inspection, you march in circles with your rifle for however many hours that you need to walk off. So if you only have 5 hours, you can get that knocked out in a Friday afternoon and then into Saturday. But depending on the infraction, you have people that, like, I graduated as a centuryman, which means that I accumulated over 100 hours over the course of my 4 years at West Point. And yeah, it's just marching in a circle for hours at a time. And so they do 2 hours on Friday, 5 hours on Saturday, 5 hours on Sunday. So however many you have, you walk them off. So that's the smallest infraction is missing class. You're going to get 5 right off the bat.
And Connor, what exactly is a centuryman? Like, what does that mean at West Point?
So that means due to any number of infractions, you accrued over 100 hours or more. So I graduated with 115 hours. So it's sort of like a dubious achievement. It's something where obviously I had to have broken rules or got caught doing something that I wasn't supposed to be doing. So that aspect isn't good. But then with a lot of things at West Point, we try to take a humorous spin. And that's just one way we cope with being at West Point, is just to make a joke of things, and not make a joke of in the sense that we're not taking it seriously, but keep a good positive attitude about the thing that you're about to go do. And that is put on a uniform and march in a circle for hours on end. So having 100 hours is somewhat of an achievement, because it means you got in trouble enough times that you had to do that, but you weren't kicked out and you still graduate. It's a weird way to look at getting in trouble, but that's just how we do it.
So supplementary to the education and the discipline that they instill in you guys, is there combat training as well, similar to like Green Berets or like Bud SEAL training when you guys are there?
No, not to that extent. I mean, you mentioned 2 special operations community. Those are high level training for tier 1 operators. We're not doing that. We're doing basic soldiering skills, and we do that in the summertime through a variety of different training exercises that we have to complete. And that's when you learn how to be a soldier, how to fire your weapon, how to do land navigation, all the basic fundamentals that you then build your military career off of. They're learned in the summer months when we do training, whether that's at West Point or different parts of the globe, really, or different schools, whether it's airborne school, air assault school, and all the other schools that are offered by our military that we can complete during our summer months when we have downtime from the academic year.
Noted. And for yourself, right? Like your grandfather went to West Point, so obviously that's a touchy point there. But you being from Jersey, this whole idea of going to West Point seems like, damn, this is going to be a lot of work for yourself at the time, maybe being 18, 19, to go through this process. Why didn't you go to like a Rutgers or, some school in Jersey or New York?
Yep. Great question. I was actually 17 when I showed up at West Point. I was young for my grade, so I was pretty young. So I've been going up to West Point since I was a little kid. I have memories as far back as 4 years old, because my grandfather had season football tickets, so my dad would bring me up all the time. But I always just thought, well, I don't want to go to a military school. I have no desire to be in the military, so I'm not going to go to West Point. So I always knew of West Point, knew of its prestige, but it never interested me. And then high school happened, and it started to take shape that I could play football at the next level. And when schools started coming around to recruit me, Rutgers being one of them, West Point was also in that mix, and they started recruiting me. And for those who are unfamiliar with the process, I think you're still allowed to take 5 official visits. And I had 5 visits lined up to different schools, as I said, regular people schools included. But West Point was my first trip, and I took it. And immediately when I got there, it just felt right. I think if you talk to a lot of athletes all over the country when trying to figure out where am I going to go to school, it's not necessarily, I like their stadium, or I like the city where the school is located. Those things come into play. But so often you'll hear guys say it just felt right. And that's how it was for me. When I went on my visit to Army, it just felt right. I canceled my other visits and I committed to West Point on the spot.
Dude, that's amazing. And especially for yourself being 17 to make that decision to go down the path of most resistance. I really respect that, because I think most people just choose the easy option. And I feel like that was myself. I didn't really have a great GPA in high school, and I just went to a 2-year community college in Miami, where I was from. So I always look back and wish I could have like pushed myself a little bit more at that time. Now, so fast forwarding through West Point, you go on deployment to Iraq. What is there certain requirements at West Point to say you have to be active for a certain number of years and go to like the reserves of some component?
Yes. So with all the service academies, you have a 5-year active duty commitment to the branch that you commission into. So in my case, 5 years in the Army. ROTC program at every other college in the country has a 4-year commitment. So the service academies are unique in that we have 1 extra year on that commitment, and then 3 years in the reserves. So that's how I found myself going to Iraq in 2008, because that fell during my active duty deployment, or active duty service time.
And I guess like I'm just like super curious because a lot of the things that I see from military, it's from like cinematic movies like Bradley Cooper and American Sniper and things of that sort. And it's been very few people that I've spoken to in my life that have actually gone over there and served. I really just want to tap into your experience. Like, how was that like?
In Iraq
Yeah,
specifically?
yeah.
Wow, a lot of different ways to answer that. I would say overall, it was a good growth experience. Taught me a lot about myself and my capabilities as a person, as a leader, and taught me a lot of lessons that I still call on to this day, all these years later. Certainly, it was challenging at times being away from friends and family. And 2008 was before basically all the social media that we have now, but we still had Facebook back then. So you would see and experience things that you were missing. So that certainly made it more difficult. You see the parties and the events that you're missing back home. And I can distinctly remember, I think the first or second email I wrote home to a group of people. And when you're arriving there and you're staring down the barrel of forgive the pun, but staring down the barrel of a 12 or 15-month deployment, it can feel like a really long time. So if you just yourself right now think about, today is July 22nd, 2026, and you think, I'm going to go do something and I'm going to do that thing until July 22nd, 2027, feels like a long time. A year is a considerable amount of your life. So when you get there, it's daunting. And I will admit, there's a part of you that is sad. I'd imagine people have similar feelings when they go to jail and they have to be in jail for a certain amount of time. And by no means is going to Iraq jail, but what happens is you discover your new routines, you start executing on the mission that you're there to do, and the days just start to chip away and go away. And next thing you know, you're halfway through, and then you get past that. And then next thing you know, you're 100 days out from going home. So just like anything, it can seem like a long time at the start, college. Oh man, I'm going to be here for 4 years. It feels like forever. And then talk to basically anybody who goes to college and they sit there at the end. They're like, wow, where did that time go? It's the same thing with a deployment, except the only difference with a deployment is it's a lot more dangerous than most of the other things you're going to do for a year plus of your life. So daunting, but overall good experience. And certainly I came away with certain negatives that I also still carry with me to this day and have to deal with on a daily basis. But it shaped who I am. It shaped my path to where I am now and gave me a path to where I can give back to the veteran and service member community. So it's fulfilling in that way as well.
I was also reading a bit of your story as well, Connor, to add on to that. And you got me down a huge rabbit hole, I would say earlier, where you said in your downtimes you would watch The Challenge, which I remember watching that as a kid on MTV, and that guy named CT. Those just like vivid memories of that. But excluding the downtimes in your role, is it kind of like fixated on one job for like an extended period over a year, or is your role day to day constantly changing when you're over there in Iraq? Because for most 9 to 5ers, your role, if you stay in the same job and same position, you could be doing the same thing for a year. But I'm curious, when you're out there in Iraq, is your role pretty fixed for a certain number of months, or how does that work exactly?
Yeah, it's fixed for a decent amount of time. It's not like you're doing something wildly different day to day. I'll speak from my experience. The first 4 months, I was doing foot patrols and security for the large FOB, forward operating base, that I was at, ensuring that the area surrounding the FOB was secure, gathering intelligence, trying to find weapons caches so that whomever couldn't launch attacks at the FOB. From there, I did a month and I trained an Iraqi battalion, basic soldiering skills, myself and my platoon, which was a new challenge because I had one interpreter to address 500 Iraqis and try to teach them how to be soldiers without communicating with words. So that was a challenge, trying to figure out hand movements and just the basics, right in the face of that language barrier. So that was a challenge. And then I got plucked out of that and sent to a completely new unit at a completely different part of the country because my battalion commander at the time wanted me to get experience in another role as a fire support officer. I was an artillery guy, so I was going to go support a cavalry troop, and I went down to the border of Iran and monitored the border and all things that were happening as they crossed the border from Iran into Iraq. So you can imagine that kept me pretty busy. But I'm a firm believer that everything kind of happens for a reason. And, when I made that change and that switch, it was incredibly daunting because I had my platoon that I was in charge of that I had trained with for 6 or 8 months, gotten close with, and then I was told, you're out of here. And it wasn't like, hey, you're out of here in the next few weeks or so. It was, hey, get your stuff ready. You're probably going to leave tomorrow or the next day. That was just a whoa type moment. And then, oh, by the way, you're in the middle of this deployment and you're going to go to a brand new unit where you don't know a single soul. Good luck. Need you to do it. Execute the mission. And I got really lucky that I met my battle buddy, Rob. He was another lieutenant in this Cav troop, and we became super tight to the point where, he's one of my best friends to this day. He was in my wedding. I got lucky there. So I had this person that I could lean on, and we had a lot of similar interests, and we shared an office that was like 4 by 4 feet. It was crazy. So you can imagine if you had to share an office with someone that was 4 by 4 feet in Iraq and you didn't like that person, that would have been miserable. So to answer your question, it doesn't change day to day, but with intel and what the mission dictates, you might have some deviations, but largely you're doing stuff in longer stints. And now you mentioned, American Sniper. And again, when you get to those tier 1 operators, their missions are changing more frequently and they're doing them for shorter periods of time, higher intensity, more high value targets. But overall, you have a general idea of what you're doing day to day.
In this piece, I want to get fixated a little bit more where you mentioned that, there's a time where you were training Iraqi soldiers. For myself, as a civilian, I kind of just read what's online and stuff. And what was the reasoning behind that to train these soldiers? Was it like Saddam Hussein had gotten captured, and then there was a bunch of just like, I guess called like insurgents in Iraq, and then the U.S. was trying to gather those people to fight for us? Like, what was the story behind that?
This was Iraqi army. So they just didn't have any direction. They didn't have leadership. They didn't know what they were doing. And they needed to get squared away, essentially. They just needed to understand how to be an army. Mm-hmm. And I think people would probably take for granted, believe me, there are people in our military who are not the brightest bulbs, but God love them. They're hardworking. And when you give them a task to do and a job in the military, they're going to be freaking awesome at those tasks and those jobs. Our soldiers, our sailors, our Marines, they are good at being soldiers, sailors, and Marines. And so many other countries' militaries, the standard is nowhere near the standard that we uphold for our military. So it was our job to just try to get them better than what they were, because what they were is basically just a bunch of ragtag group of guys who happen to be wearing the same uniform without any understanding or basic skills in order to be an army. So we just needed to get them to a place where they could do things for themselves and, in theory, allow us to go home.
And so when you're in Iraq, right, like there's multiple groups of kind of different, I don't know, I just don't know how to explain this, but like I think a lot of people see it as it was just the US versus this one big army in Iraq. And I think there was more to it, right? There's multiple different groups that you guys were trying to fight off at one point.
Yeah. Yeah. I
Okay.
mean, different insurgents, Al Qaeda at the time was
Yeah.
still very prevalent and then gave way to ISIS in Iraq. So you're fighting against these people and you're fighting against this ideology that America is the big bad boogeyman. Everything we do is horrible. And their job is to get rid of Americans and not allow us to further our diplomatic mission or further our goodwill throughout the world. And they're just filled with a lot of hate. And that's an incredibly difficult enemy to face because they have no off switch, so to
Hmm.
speak. They're nowhere near as disciplined as us.
Hmm.
They will quit eventually. But it's just a challenge because you have to go back to, really maybe Korea and certainly World War II, where we're traditional warfare fighting against another nation. And I don't, you're starting to see that a little bit now with what's going on in the Middle East. But it was not traditional warfare while we
Hmm.
were there. And, when you go back to my time at West Point, the instruction in the summers morphed while we were there because we were getting lessons from the battlefield on what's actually going on and what should we be learning about. We were initially learning traditional infantry small unit tactics and realizing as we got older, wait a second, that's not what's happening. Certainly in Iraq and in the streets of Iraq, a little bit more so in our fighting in Afghanistan, but we had to adjust our training to ensure that we were prepared to go over there because the traditional ways of being a soldier just weren't applicable in that time period in Iraq and Afghanistan.
And to add on to that, I think like the common question from civilians, including myself, is like we went in initially because of 9/11, from my understanding, to get Saddam Hussein. But I think the question that most people have is like, what was the reasoning for being there so many years? Like, what was the reasoning from your perspective that you saw out there that maybe most people don't realize or know?
I mean, I don't think it's a secret, and that's the $1 million question. But I think anytime you're dealing with an military going into another country like that, we have to have a clear exit strategy. And I think we went in with a clear mission in some instances, and then things sort of snowballed out of control. And it's one of those things where you say, like, all right, if we can just get to this point, then we can leave. If we could just get to this point and that ball keeps getting pushed down and that goal post keeps getting moved to where it gets harder and harder to leave. And then, candidly, being in war monetarily benefits certain pockets of industry in this country. So if you're making a factory that's making bullets and making tanks, probably don't want it to end because business is booming, right? So you get the greed of American business to see the profit. And well before Iraq and Afghanistan, war was, there's a famous line called "War is a racket," and that's even harder to fight against
Mhm.
because you're trying to tell people that are making an unbelievable living who are nowhere near the battlefield. You got to look them in the eye and say, hey, stop what you're doing. Stop making money. Stop living a great life because of all this money you're making. And it's just human nature to have a hard time saying, oh, okay, I'll just shut my business down and I'll stop providing for my family because when you don't see the impact of war on your doorstep, it's very easy to ignore it. So when
Hmm.
you don't have friends and family that are being killed in Iraq and Afghanistan, it's easy to ignore it. And we as a country became desensitized
Hmm.
to it. So I think it's a confluence of a lot of different things. I don't think there's one specific reason why we didn't get home sooner, because in theory we quote unquote accomplished our missions and should have been home much sooner than 20 years. But the more people that get their hands in the operation, politicians, businessmen, businesswomen, it gets harder and harder because it gets more and more complicated. And trying to get people to agree on what we should be doing and what the mission is becomes even more murky. So I think that's what happened in Iraq and
Hmm.
Afghanistan.
To your first point about the money, I feel like that's first principles thinking always. Typically, a lot of these things always lead back to money. And one movie that I really did enjoy was War Dogs with Jonah Hill. That one's have you seen that one?
Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolute banger. And it's just you see the economics behind the money being made off the military and the ammunition, the weapons, etc. And to that second point too, I feel that a lot of people, like you mentioned, are desensitized to what actually goes on in war, and I feel like there's a lack of appreciation for a lot of times of all the benefits we get here of like the safety and not having to, fend off people and armies on the street. Like that's a reality for some people in some countries. So um,
Yeah, you
I
don't
feel
have to
like
worry in this country. Well, maybe you do to an extent, unfortunately, with some of the violence that occurs in this country. But by and large, people don't have their kids walk to school and worry, oh man, is an IED going to go off on the side of the road and take off my kid's arm? I'd say most people don't think about that on a daily basis. And you're absolutely right that people just don't think about our military and the sacrifices made, and not just the people in the military. Let's talk about, if you are, let's take you for example. So you have young children now. Now, next week, go away for a year and then come back. And then about 8 months later, go away for a year again. Imagine what kind of stress that would place on your wife and the military families and the sacrifices they had to make to, one, not have that person in their life, whether their dad, their mom, brother, sister, whomever, husband, wife. So you're worried about their safety on a daily basis. Their stressor number one. You have lack of their help because they're not there. Stressor number two. Perhaps you're in a military town where you've just moved, you don't really know anyone, maybe you don't have a job. Stressor number three. And the list goes on. So we don't appreciate in this country enough how strong our military families are and the sacrifices they make alongside their service members.
agreed, agreed. I mean, there's again, it's just like there's so many people that maybe they need to get educated more on like what happens, or their whole kind of black box of reality has been living in the states. And I still think there's a huge percentage of people that take it for granted everything that we have here. I think my follow question, Cons, is do you believe war is necessary? Like, do you think if we go in 100, 200, 300 years, will war always exist? My answer, I believe yes, it will always exist. But I'm curious to see what you think.
That's pretty existential. And there's some philosopher that said, and forgive me, I'm blanking on his name, but the purpose of war is war itself, and war serves itself. And unfortunately, I think human nature is such that while you try to avoid certain things, certain, trying to figure out the best way to say this. I don't want to say war is inevitable because I don't necessarily believe that, But I do think you get into situations where you're impacting people on a large scale where it might always devolve down to, all right, well, this is our last resort. We have to go to war. I would be hard pressed to say in our lifetimes we'll see like full blown like World War II ever happen again. Like I legitimately do not envision World War III ever happening, just because I think with the sophistication, our ability to communicate in real time with other countries, and understanding and learning from the past and not wanting to do that again, because I don't think anybody would sign up for a world war unless you're just a complete psychopath of a leader, which, don't get me wrong, those exist in this world.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think anyone would want to do that again because they saw what it did to us once, and it is almost guaranteed that it would happen like that again and play out like that again, where we decimated countries and populations and displaced a ton of people and killed a lot of people. I don't think anyone would want to do that ever again.
So how do you envision war in like 20, 30 years? You think it's more of like
I think
technology
it's
wars of
more,
cyber
yeah.
hacking and
I think there's more diplomacy and less actual war in a perfect world. I think you're seeing now all of the unmanned war that is happening, whether that's drones and weapon systems that are launched from incredibly long distances. So you're not seeing the traditional in your face battles that we've once experienced. And hopefully maybe that trend can continue. I do not have a crystal ball.
right.
If I did, I'd probably be an incredibly wealthy person. But I also don't think, I think anybody who gives you a definitive answer on this topic is lying to themselves and or trying to sound smarter than they are, because I
100%.
don't know that anybody can predict this.
100%. I think there's something called like Lindy effect that if it's happened for 100 years, you could expect the same outcome in the next 100. And like studying history, there's always been war with like Genghis Khan and any kind of time period. So for myself, it's like I don't envision this place where everything's like kumbaya, and I'm not exactly sure of the maybe the technology makes it that we're more so like
Well, I think
different.
we've evolved as a human race
Yeah,
to a point where we can avoid that. You go back thousands of years, you're talking about individuals that could barely communicate with one another, right? So your human nature of, well, that person hurt me, so I'm going to hurt them back. And then as we evolve as a species on this planet, you realize, oh, okay, we get to a point where we can talk through things a lot more. And the idea that history could repeat itself the way it did in World War II, I think becomes a lot less likely. Again, I would never say definitively it's never going to happen again. I don't think it's likely that would happen again.
right. Yeah,
I
because
think we've
my
evolved beyond that.
yeah, no, because my whole I guess thought process is like I think I have a theory that majority of the world is good. Like in the US, for the most part, most neighbors you have are kind people, they have good souls, but there's like these outlier singular type people like the Hitlers or the Kim Jong-uns that are like just pure evil and they have like zero reasoning. And those people I feel like are the ones that maybe initiate the wars to occur again and again if like they're able to gain an army and gain control of a whole country. So it's like it's kind of like my whole thought process as to why I believe it could potentially keep happening, in my opinion. But yeah, man, pretty nuts.
I think again, you might be right. From my perspective, I think the fact that we've been so far removed, and we keep coming back to World War II, but we've been so far removed and avoided that for so many years. I think with each passing year, it becomes less likely that we find ourselves in that situation again. Because if you look, from 1945 until present, there were a good amount of world events that occurred that could have devolved into a world war, or certainly something that could match in scale or nearly match in scale to World War II, but they didn't happen. right? And again, I think people look at what happened in World War II, and even if you're wacky and you don't like the way the world works, I don't know that anyone would sign up for that again. So I think if it were going to happen, it might have already happened.
Right.
But each day we get more equipped to ensure that we never see something on that scale again.
Yeah, no, those are definitely all valid points. There's been a lot of times on the news where you think like things about to go down and things de-escalate very quickly. So Cons, I want to segue into this piece because I think this is super important. And selfishly for myself, doing the podcasting, you've been doing this for a while. Uh, Zero Blog 30 for 8.5 years. Bold American podcast. For yourself, if you could go back in time and talk to Cons when he first started, what are some pointers? What are some tips of advice you would give to your younger self doing it?
I just reiterate that it's not easy, and don't get discouraged, because, speaking on behalf of Zero Blog 30, we did 644 episodes, I think, 8.5 years. And that put us at that time in 2% of longest running podcasts on Apple Podcasts. So we were in rarefied air there. And it doesn't always seem like you're going to get there at times. So just don't get discouraged, and keep going, and you'll find your audience. And I would preemptively tell myself, you are going to hear the meanest things said about you by strangers on the internet, and don't worry, it doesn't matter what they say. Uh, but I think overall, I would just tell my younger self, keep going, because it's fun, and you're gonna get a lot of cool opportunities, meet a lot of cool people, be given a platform, and help build a platform that affords you the opportunity to help and give back to the veteran community, to the military community. And it's just overall going to be a lot of fun. So just keep your head down and keep going.
Mm. Appreciate that, sir. And to that point of the hate comments, I just received my first hate comments on X, I think 3 weeks ago. So I think I made it. No, in all seriousness, no. But what made you get started into podcasting? I've seen very few podcasters like the Jockos of the world that they have the background military, then they do their own platform. But like, what made you do that after you left Iraq? Like, why podcasting?
So I'm going to just kind of gloss over some stuff here to kind of help you understand how I got in there into the, Barstool and doing the podcasting thing. I've always been opinionated, and I, like many Irishmen, have a gift of gab, and I can talk. And I remember back when I thought the challenge in MTV was really good, there was a podcast that would do a recap every night after the episode. And I really enjoyed listening to that podcast. And then that podcast just ended. And Jesus, it's so long ago now, I forget why. So I wasn't trying to get a job at Barstool. I wasn't trying to make money. I literally just thought, man, now there's this void in my life. What if I fill that void? And there really wasn't any other ulterior motive other than I just thought I could do it. I had done a couple interviews at that point, so the idea that I could speak about something didn't seem too foreign to me. And I reached out to Clem at Barstool and knew he was a big a big challenge guy. And I said, what if we started a podcast? And this is back when nobody had podcasts. This is 2015, where podcasts, where you couldn't throw a nickel and hit 400 podcasts. There were not a lot of podcasts at this point. And Clem was newer to Barstool, and he wanted to create a lane for himself. So he said yes. And I had a relationship with Clem. We recorded a test episode, and we were like, wow, that was fun. This is going to be awesome. And then right before we launched the first episode, he said, I just want to make sure I'm not stepping on any toes. So I'm going to reach out to Big Cat at Barstool and say, hey, is it cool if we do this podcast? And this is before PMT. Big Cat says, yeah, that's cool if you guys do that, but can I do it with you? And we said, yeah, of course. Why wouldn't? Because at that point, he was doing KFC radio. People knew who Big Cat was. He had a massive following, so it was great. So we did that with him. Then Big Cat went on to start PMT. So then we kept going with the Challenge podcast with some other folks, some rotating cast. And then 2016 summer, Chaps got hired at Barstool and said, I want to start a podcast for veterans, and put that out in a tweet. And he said, if you're a veteran with funny stories, reach out to me and tell me a funny story. I'm going to talk to a different veteran every week. So I just thought, well, I had funny stories from when I was in the Army. So I sent him a story and he asked me to record. And again, I wasn't trying to do this so I could start a podcast. I wasn't trying to work at Barstool. I wasn't trying to create this brand. I just thought it would be fun. Simply enough. I just thought it would be fun. And he and I just kind of had chemistry off the bat, recorded an episode. Dave told him to post it. I did that for a few weeks. And then the 4th episode of Zero Block 30, he said, I think Connor's just going to be my co-host. He didn't tell me he was going to say that. And we just went from there. And I've never quit anything in my life. So I just kept going for 8.5 years. And then Chaps and Kate decided they wanted to go in different directions creatively, do other things at Barstool. And that's when I picked up the mantle and decided to create Bold American, which is where we're at now. And it's something that I just get fulfillment from when you get messages from people, or when you get requests from folks looking for help and you're able to connect them directly with help because you've now built up this network. I just think overall, everybody in life is looking for their path and trying to figure out, what should I do with my time besides, going to work every day, starting a family, what are other areas of my life that can lend themselves to my passion, to my time. And for me, podcasting and ultimately, now for the last decade plus working at Barstool has been that outlet for me. And it's just been a lot of fun. So I would say to people, find things in your life that give you joy and provide you with fun, because I think that's a really important part of life. Life is not meant to be a slog. Life is not meant to be boring. Life is not meant to be sad all the time. Certainly there are parts of your life that might get boring, might get sad, might get difficult, but it's not meant to be that, in my opinion, in perpetuity. So find those outlets, whether that's time with your family, traveling, sports, whatever. I think that's really just where I came to find myself at Barstool. Is I found a lane that I really enjoyed, and I'm going to keep doing it so long as I can.
Dude, I love that so much. For myself, like doing this podcast, I've been working full-time W-2 for the past 5 years simultaneously while doing this. And for myself, it's like one of those things that I truly feel passionate about it. A lot of times people are like, oh, are you making money with this? Or like, why are you doing this, in a sense? But I just get the fulfillment. I get the sense of excitement. And the analogy I always have for people, before podcasts, it's like the sensation of like going to play a game of, like, let's say in high school, I used to play basketball. It feels very similar of like, all right, you have those jitters, you've prepared. And then once the podcast hits record, it's like, all right, it's game time. And then, you're just in that flow. For myself, that's the thing that I enjoy. And just having an excuse to meet new people every week for me is a huge blessing. Captain Cons, want to thank you for your time today, truly. Thank you for your service. I hope people watch this and gain insight into the military, gain appreciation for the military, for this beautiful country. Where can people find you in your social media platforms, podcast?
Yeah, I'm at Captain Cons everywhere, and Bold American Pod everywhere. And certainly, just around in and around the Barstool universe. I find myself luckily doing other content with other folks at Barstool. So I'm very fortunate in that regard. So yeah, I appreciate it, Gabriel. Thanks so much for taking time to chat with me today and giving me yet another platform to tell my story. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Connor.